faithfully sharing value by exploring great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll interpret this book for you called The American Trap, subtitled How Non-Commercial Tactics Undermine Foreign Businesses. Spoiler: in May 2019, Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei was interviewed by Bloomberg TV in the US about Huawei facing the American ban. The interview was later disclosed. In a photo, Ren Zhengfei's desk had a copy of The American Trap, which quickly became a hot topic. The author of this book is Frédéric Pierucci, a former executive at Alstom, a French energy and transportation giant. In 2013, while on a U.S. business trip, he was suddenly arrested by the FBI due to a 2003 Alstom bribery case in Asia. Pierucci was a key executive aware of the case. He was jailed in a U.S. prison for violent offenders for over 2 years and left with almost nothing after release. Meanwhile, Alstom faced investigation and heavy fines from the U.S. Department of Justice. While he was serving time, a deal was quietly struck. American giant General Electric successfully acquired Alstom's core business, taking over 70% of its operations. In Pierucci's view, this acquisition was an underground economic war using law as a weapon, a classic American trap. In January 2019, Pierucci first published The American Trap in France. This book tells his story. So what's this book really about? Now, let's dive into Pierucci's own account. When arrested, he was 45, had worked at Alstom for 22 years before the incident. He'd just been promoted to global head of the boiler department at an Alstom power plant subsidiary, managing over 4,000 employees. At the time, Alstom was discussing a joint venture with China's Shanghai Electric Group, and he was set to lead it. But everything ended abruptly on April 14th, 2013. It was supposed to be a routine trip. But when his plane landed at New York's JFK Airport, a flight attendant called his name over the PA. Just like that, Pierucci, in his suit, was handcuffed and taken away by uniformed officers, while half asleep, shoved into a police car, and brought to the FBI. In a conference room, a prosecutor told him he was accused of involvement in a bribery case. That was 10 years ago, in an Alstom power plant project in Indonesia, where they allegedly bribed an Indonesian legislator, and Pierucci was one of the executives who knew about it. This bribery case traces back to early 2000. At that time, Alstom was bidding for this project in Indonesia. To succeed, they had to find intermediaries connected to the Indonesian government. Alstom found a total of 3 intermediaries. According to the U.S. Department of Justice indictment, it was through the 3rd intermediary that Alstom bribed a member of Indonesia's Energy Committee. For a long time, securing orders by bribing officials was a routine gray area practice for many multinational companies. France even once allowed companies to deduct intermediary hiring costs as tax expenses. In other words, bribing foreign officials was tacitly permitted under French legal frameworks. According to Pierucci, within Alstom, hiring intermediaries followed a process. It required at least 13 signatures per intermediary. And for transactions exceeding $50 million, they had to report to group headquarters and inform the CEO. Pierucci was one of the signatories in the Indonesian bribery project. Additionally, to distance themselves, Alstom set up a Swiss subsidiary to provide fake service certificates and pay commissions to intermediaries. However, this time, Alstom ran into American scrutiny because the U.S. has the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits individuals and companies from bribing foreign public officials. But this U.S. law doesn't just apply to U.S. companies and citizens. It can target any foreign entity with minor U.S. ties, like being listed in the U.S., using dollar transactions, or using U.S.-based servers for emails. And Alstom not only paid intermediary fees through its U.S. subsidiary, but also had U.S. financing, leading to the U.S. Department of Justice's actions. Pierucci was implicated by two types of evidence. First, they caught an Alstom employee and an intermediary from the Indonesian project who implicated him. Second, numerous Alstom internal emails showed that Pierucci was aware of the matter. After Pierucci's arrest, the prosecutor bluntly gave him two options: cooperate with the US DOJ by providing evidence of Alstom's bribery, or go through legal proceedings. At the time, Pierucci found the demand unreasonable and immediately rejected cooperation. He didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. He wrote, "I didn't deceive anyone, didn't harm anyone, didn't take a single cent in kickbacks. I gained nothing. Moreover, everything had strictly followed Alstom's internal procedures." He trusted Alstom would quickly rescue him. Right after arrest, he did get a promise from Carl, the company's legal director, to bail him out first thing next morning. But Pierucci clearly underestimated the severity of this crisis. In reality, he spent 25 months total in U.S. prisons, detained at a place called Wyatt Detention Center. From afar, it looked like an ordinary administrative building. Up close, it resembled a stone coffin. No windows, just 15 centimeters wide by 80 centimeters high slits. The facility was surrounded by barbed wire, with only armored vehicles coming and going. This was among America's highest security prisons, housing top dangerous criminals from various states. Cells measured just 11 square meters, shared by 3. Toilets had no partitions. His 2 cellmates, a credit card counterfeiting gambler, and a drug-dealing addict. Initially, Pierucci couldn't sleep. He faced 10 charges, including conspiracy to bribe and money laundering. If convicted on all counts, he'd face 125 years total. Alstom hired a U.S. law firm that assigned him 2 attorneys. He advised the lawyers to mount an innocent defense, requesting evidence from Alstom to prove he'd just followed company rules. But they looked at him like he was a fool. He suddenly realized this was impossible, as it would implicate more people. He then asked the lawyers to find clues in the prosecution's evidence against Alstom executives. But they said the prosecutor's files contained 1.5 million exhibits, including 14 years of Alstom executives' emails and undercover recordings, requiring at least 3 years to review, with legal fees reaching millions. The lawyer advised him to plead guilty to get the minimum sentence, expected to be 6 months instead of the theoretical 125 years. But Pierucci wasn't ready to give up. He believed he was just doing his job all along. However, he soon yielded because the detention center was breaking him mentally. From the moment of arrest, he applied for bail, hoping to leave the detention center. Yet, the prosecutor repeatedly raised the stakes, from a $1.9 million bail to requiring 1 U.S. citizen to provide property collateral, then 2 citizens. Every time he and his family met the bail requirements, the prosecutor demanded more, which devastated him. Days in detention felt like years. No watch, no computer, no flights, no meetings, nothing. A prisoner next to Pierucci was raped, another committed suicide, and inmates often fought with knives. The most exciting things in life became whether he'd get 3 chicken legs a month or a small tub of ice cream next Sunday. In July 2013, after 100 days in custody, Pierucci signed a plea agreement. In June 2014, after 14 months in prison, his bail application was approved. By then, he lost 40 pounds, making his old suit look absurdly oversized. 2 years after bail, he was sentenced to 30 months in prison. The prosecutor claimed Pierucci had gained personal benefits from the case, but according to Pierucci, this personal benefit was a $700 bonus for his role in the project. This time, he was imprisoned in the U.S. at another remote correctional center due to good behavior and credit for time already served in detention. His sentence was reduced. On September 9, 2018, he was finally released. In total, he spent 25 months in U.S. prisons, a nightmare lasting 5.5 years since his arrest at JFK. Back in France, he faced unemployment. After such a legal battle, he couldn't find a job matching his former position or salary. So he started his own business, consulting French companies on international anti-corruption issues. Because even while detained, he had analyzed the entire ordeal and studied thousands of pages on the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Um, During this process, Pierucci concluded the entire ordeal was a massive American trap that ensnared both him and Alstom. First, regarding his personal trap, he felt he'd become the company's scapegoat and sacrificial lamb. Actually, while still in detention, he'd realized the company might abandon him. After his arrest, his employer of 22 years, Alstom, increasingly disappointed him. No proactive contact, no prison visits. In September 2013, 2 months after signing the plea deal, Alstom fired him via email, citing long-term absenteeism and disrupting management. They only covered legal fees until the plea agreement. That day, moreover, Pierucci believed his imprisonment stemmed from Alstom's non-cooperation with the U.S. DOJ investigation. Actually, over 3 years before his arrest, the U.S. DOJ had already launched an Alstom probe. The DOJ discovered that from 2000 to 2011, Alstom paid $75 million in bribes to officials and falsified accounts to secure $4 billion in global projects. Pierucci also learned Alstom subsidiaries had been prosecuted for corruption in over a dozen countries, 2 blacklisted by the World Bank. But this time, they fell into American hands. His lawyer revealed Americans had planted an informant in Alstom's core division. This nearly 65-year-old had hidden a recorder in his shirt pocket for years, capturing crucial conversations. Typically, after obtaining bribery evidence, the U.S. DOJ contacts companies to sign deferred prosecution agreements. Companies must typically agree to self-incriminate and expose employees when necessary. They must also accept an internal monitor. This monitor reports to the U.S. DOJ for 3 consecutive years. Signing this agreement usually means corporate fines but no executive arrests. Before Alstom, 2 French companies paid $398 million and $338 million in fines through this process. When negotiating with the U.S. DOJ, 99% of companies choose to cooperate and pay fines. For example, Japanese company Marubeni Corporation that partnered with Alstom in Indonesia was similarly targeted by US DOJ for using intermediaries, but no one was arrested. Because once caught by the US DOJ, the Japanese immediately signed a plea agreement. Their attitude could be summed up as, "Oh, we got caught red-handed. Fine. We'll admit fault and pay up, but won't open our doors for global investigations to avoid convictions on other projects." Pierucci studied hundreds of FCPA cases. Only 2 chose full legal resistance. But Alstom chose a third path, faked cooperation. In 2010, the US DOJ approached Alstom CEO Patrick Cron, but he reacted with anger and ignored them. Only after persuasion by the legal director did they hire a Washington law firm for the required internal audit. But Cron thought they could just pick one project as token compliance. Unexpectedly, the firm conducted deep investigations and strongly urged immediate DOJ cooperation. Cron deemed the firm overly curious and reckless. He rashly fired both the law firm and legal director, then stalled the matter. This attitude infuriated the US DOJ. A DOJ official publicly admitted at a press conference that after pursuing 4 Alstom executives, including Pierucci, since 2013, Alstom began genuine cooperation. Pierucci wrote that after 3 years of feigned cooperation, the company sacrificed him to prove sincerity to America. This was essentially a personal trap for him. And why say Alstom also fell into a trap? Pierucci believes the DOJ investigation and his arrest pressured Alstom to help America's General Electric acquire Alstom's power division. This acquisition was announced on April 24th, 2014. Alstom sold its entire power division, accounting for 75% of revenue, to main competitor General Electric for about $13 billion. When Pierucci heard the news in prison, he was stunned speechless. He recalled that months earlier, due to liquidity issues, Kron planned to sell 20% of Alstom's transport division to Russia and form a joint energy equipment venture with China. But now he suddenly wanted to sell the crucial power and grid divisions to Americans. It was insane. Moreover, the deal negotiations were conducted in extreme secrecy. Until media announcement, even French officials and most Alstom employees were unaware. Kron only told the legal director and grid division head. So why did he believe this acquisition was tied to U.S. judicial pressure on Alstom? We summarize 4 key arguments from his book. First, suspicious timing. Whenever executives were prosecuted or arrested, Alstom's negotiations with DOJ or GE advanced. For example, the day after Pierucci's arrest, Alstom's legal director Carl went to Washington to meet DOJ officials. In July 2013, when Pierucci pleaded guilty and VP Hoskins was indicted, secret GE Alstom talks began that same month. On April 23, 2014, Hoskins was arrested. The next day, GE and Alstom announced their deal. Finally, in June 2014, Pierucci's bail was approved. The same week, Alstom management signed assets over to GE. By then, he'd waited 14 months in prison. Second, the unusually close relationship between GE and US DOJ. Personnel flow showed GE frequently offered compliance management roles to prosecutors transitioning careers. By 2014, 15 prosecutors had moved to Georgia. Historically, companies facing DOJ corruption charges were often acquired by Georgia. Pierucci cited Envision Technologies, accused in 2004 of bribing in Philippines, Thailand projects, then swallowed by GE. The case ended with a deferred prosecution agreement between Envision GE and DOJ. Third, the US DOJ investigation caused GE's competitors to withdraw. According to Pierucci, during the Alstom deal, French economy minister Montebourg brought in Siemens to compete against GE's acquisition attempt, but negotiations failed. Pierucci believes what made Siemens back down was the US DOJ's massive fine against Alstom. Siemens feared having to pay Alstom's penalty after acquisition. They'd suffered similar consequences before. In 2006, Siemens was investigated by the US for corruption and paid a record $800 million fine. They didn't want to repeat this nightmare with Alstom. Unlike Siemens, GE promised to fully assume Alstom's DOJ fine post-acquisition, a condition Siemens couldn't accept. Fourth, regarding personnel penalties, including Pierucci, the US DOJ only arrested 3 Alstom employees connected to the Indiation project. This case involved under $600,000, while the remaining $70 million in bribes weren't pursued against anyone. This selective enforcement suggests America's goal wasn't punishing bribery's masterminds, but pressuring Alstom leadership to compromise on the acquisition. Moreover, Pierucci argues this acquisition brought little benefit to Alstom. Ultimately, the US DOJ fined Alstom $772 million, but refused GE's payment, forcing Alstom to bear the cost. After paying this enormous fine, plus corporate debts and new venture registration costs, Alstom was nearly bankrupt on paper after selling its power division. And additionally, GE had pledged to create 1,000 jobs and transfer its rail signaling business to Alstom post-acquisition. Not only were these promises unfulfilled, but GE later conducted layoffs in France. In February 2016, due to conflicts with Electricité de France, GE unilaterally suspended service for 58 nuclear reactors in France for days. Pierucci believes America gained partial control of France's nuclear plants through this deal, pressuring France to align internationally. His ordeal wasn't one man's battle, but an underground economic war waged by America. Under legal and moral pretenses, Americans attempt to dismantle foreign multinationals. He cites statistics, including FCPA and other U.S. law violations, fines imposed. French companies have paid $12 billion to the U.S. government, exceeding France's annual fiscal budget. Moreover, FCPA fines have surged dramatically in recent years, from $10 million in 2004 to $2.7 billion in 2016. Foreign firms contribute most to these penalties, accounting for 67% of total fines. This concludes Pierucci's firsthand account in The American Trap. After hearing this, you might still have questions about the FCPA, G's, Alstom acquisition, etc. Next, I'll address 4 key questions using external sources. First question: how can Americans regulate a French company's corruption in Indonesia? The primary legal basis is the FCPA we mentioned earlier. Enacted in 1977, this law prohibits Americans or U.S. companies from bribing foreign officials. After 3 amendments by 1998, its scope expanded beyond just Americans or U.S. entities. Per China's Commerce Ministry, it covers any foreigner or employee if they used U.S. mail systems or American financial tools for corrupt payments. Whether via calls, emails, or bank transfers, any U.S. connection subjects them to FCPA. However, commercial anti-corruption has gained global consensus recently. Following U.S. leadership, the OECD adopted an anti-bribery convention in 1999, now ratified by 40 nations. France became a signatory in 2000. Signatories must enact domestic laws and enforce mutual monitoring and reviews among members. Ultimately constrained by national power, others mostly offer symbolic compliance. Only America enforces global long-arm jurisdiction. Second question: was there collusion between the U.S. DOJ and GE in the Alstom case? Pierucci implies collusion through timeline connections in his book. Indeed, both French public and officials raised doubts post-acquisition, but CEO Cron consistently denied them. The same week the French edition launched, The Economist published an investigative report verifying Alstom's case details. The Economist noted Pierucci isn't an angel. He's a convicted felon, with no evidence proving GE misconduct during the deal. Objectively, U.S. DOJ's global anti-corruption enforcement may advantage American companies. The article concluded, U.S. legal settlements are coercive, yet legal, but processes must be transparent and independent. In Alstom's case, judicial procedures and commercial dealings disturbingly intertwined. Third question: did Americans get a bargain when France surrendered its industrial crown jewel? Founded in 1928, Alstom dominated energy and transportation, supplying over 25% of global power equipment. In China, it participated in Three Gorges Dam, high-speed rail, and Shanghai or Nanjing metros, but faced financial crises around 2003 and 2014. The 2003 crisis was resolved through French government equity investment. The 2014 crisis led to this acquisition. Per China Electric Power News, Siemens withdrew from bidding not just due to fine concerns, as Pierucci claimed. Siemens proposed matching GE's offer, but merging would control 2/3 of Europe's energy and transport markets, triggering EU antitrust barriers. In 2017, Siemens actually moved to acquire Alstom's remaining 20% transport business. This too was blocked by EU antitrust regulators. Because Siemens joined the competition, General Electric actually increased its acquisition bid. The acquisition price for Alstom rose from 9.4 billion euros to 12.35 billion euros. But after acquiring Alstom's power division, GE didn't gain a crown jewel. It more like inherited a hot potato. Post-acquisition, GE's stock plummeted, with 2018 losses reaching $22.8 billion. GE's CEO John Flannery stated, Alstom's performance clearly fell below expectations starting in 2015, 1 year after acquisition. GE's power division then began successive layoffs. In 2015, 6,500 employees were cut. Another 12,000 were laid off in 2015, followed by thousands more in France by June 2019. From this view, this legally entangled acquisition brought GE no great wealth, as Pierucci claimed. They're still cleaning up the mess. So the final question, does this economically unfavorable deal hold higher strategic significance? In the book, the author notes then, French economy minister Montebourg fiercely opposed the deal. Montebourg believed Alstom's nuclear operations and France's high-speed rail or metro services were vital to national interests. Yet few officials questioned this strategically. Essentially, France never reached consensus on the acquisition's strategic importance. Globally, GE captured half the gas turbine market through this acquisition, gaining monopolistic power and reshaping the global power equipment landscape into an oligopoly. That concludes our interpretation of the American trap. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.